What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another edition of Wildcat Cave. This is one I was hoping we wouldn't have to make for a long time, but here we are. Kentucky season comes to a close after losing to Kansas State in the second round. On the bright side, they did get a tournament win against Providence and were able to get that monkey off their back, but that hasn't really stopped Big Blue Nation from being upset. In this video, we're going to talk about the Kansas State game and the season as a whole. A quick update on the Wildcat Cave Bracket Challenge. At this moment, before the Sweet 16 begins, here are the top 5 brackets. At number 5, we have 85 Brett, 85 number 2. At number 4, we just have Brett. At number 3 is Wildcats, 86, bracket number 1. In number 2, we have Sackwoo, 2. And right now, currently in first place before the Sweet 16 is 85 Brett, 85, bracket number 3. So thank you to everybody who's joined. We have a little over 20 brackets entered, which is awesome. Let me know in the comments what you guys, whoever wins, would want for a prize. Now for the Cats. They finished with a record of 22-12 and third in the SEC. By all accounts, this season should be considered a disappointment. We had the National Player of the Year returning, the SEC assist leader, 2 guys who have shot nearly 40% from 3, and a top 10 draft pick on the team. We are number 4 preseason in the country, and to end up with 12 losses and a second-round exit from the tourney is just completely unacceptable. We've talked about it all season, but there was no reason this team should not have started out well. Cal always talks about giving his teams time to come together, but this is a roster full of older players, most of which were on the team last season. Were there some injuries? Yeah. But regardless, to lose 4 out of your 5 big non-conference matchups with a team full of talented veterans is just unacceptable. They started the season by losing to Michigan State, Gonzaga, UCLA, and Kansas. We didn't have a quad 1 win until January when they beat Tennessee. Now, the win against Michigan ended up being a quad 1 win, but at the time it wasn't. And you couple that together and throw in a loss to South Carolina, and all of a sudden this team wasn't even making the tournament. But just as everyone was counting them out, they go down to Knoxville without Severe, without Damian, and pull off a win against Tennessee, and then rattle off 4 wins in a row, including one against A&M. And now all of a sudden fans are bought back in. They're playing well. We're on a small win streak, and we have Kansas coming to town. I went to that fan fest that UK held before the Kansas game at Rupp, and it just felt like an old Kentucky game. Everyone bought back in, even though we had been disappointed a lot up until that point in the season. Things seemed to be turning around. Lexington had that buzz in the air when there's a big game in town, and then Kansas comes in and puts on an absolute clinic against us in our building. But I mean, even a good Kentucky team could lose that game, right? It happens. I get it. Kentucky bounces back and wins at Ole Miss and then beats Florida at home, and what do you know? Another big time game at home in Rupp with a chance for Kentucky to make a statement. Arkansas comes into Rupp, and it's a chance for Kentucky to finally start building their resume with some quad 1 wins. And if you remember at the time, people were calling this a must-win game. We knew going to Arkansas was going to be tough to win at the end of the year, so we felt like we had to get them at Rupp. But they came in and beat us by 15. And once again, the fans felt like there was a chance we don't make the tournament anymore. And now at this point in the season, after a deflating loss, Kentucky would usually rattle off a couple wins against bad teams to start, and we would start to hope again. But does anybody out there remember what happened after we lost to Arkansas? We played Georgia, and they followed up an embarrassing home loss with a road loss to a team that finished 11th in the SEC. At this point, I think Kentucky's quad 1 record was something like 1-5. And if there wasn't already, there were some very real fears of not even making the NCAA tournament. But again, every time we counted this Kentucky team out, they would surprise you. Everyone thought Kentucky was done at this point. We just lost to Arkansas. We just lost to Georgia. And, we'd already lost to South Carolina at that point. But the next game was at Mississippi State, where they squeaked out a win, which ended up being a pretty good win for us. But no one was confident that Cal or anybody had this figured out yet. Then Kentucky had the most important stretch of games in the season, which started with a top 10 Tennessee team at home, which no one, if you remember, including myself, picked the Cats to win given how they'd been playing. But wouldn't you know it, they beat the Vols again, sweeping them for the first time since 2015. Now they're on a 2-game win streak, 4 games left in the season. They take care of business by winning at Florida, and then Auburn is coming to Rupp. Auburn was in a similar position to UK. They'd been slipping in the bracketology. They needed a big win to get in, and they'd been playing well at the time. Kentucky then comes out and beats them by 32, which would have been beating them by 40 if we didn't put the backups in with like 2 minutes left. And now everyone's back on board. Kentucky's on a 4-game win streak. Kentucky's hot. We're solidly in the tournament now. We're playing for seeding, and honestly, going to Arkansas at the end of the season, it doesn't matter if we win or lose as long as we take care of Vandy at home first, which of course we didn't. Vandy comes to Rupp. They beat us. They embarrass us, completely negate some of the wins we've had previously, and now we're right back where we were before we went on that little hot streak. After you lose to Vandy at home, there isn't exactly a lot of hope going into the Arkansas 3 days later and winning. They have one of the best home crowds in the country. They're playing well. Nick Smith Jr. just came back to the team and was playing great. Not to mention they just kicked your ass on your home court a few weeks ago. But in true UK fashion, they walk into Bud Walton and they dominate Arkansas start to finish. So they solidify themselves as a double bye in the SEC tournament with that win. They lock up the 3 seed in the SEC tournament, in which if you looked at that SEC bracket, out of all the teams that got a double bye, the 3 seed was probably the easiest route. With a single win in the SEC tournament, they probably have played themselves into a 5 seed after not being in the tournament 3 weeks before. Everyone's feeling good. Our first game is against Vanderbilt once again, so it's a chance for Kentucky to get a little revenge from them just beating them in Rupp a week before. Now, even if you don't know what was about to happen, just from listening to this and seeing how the season had gone so far, I bet you could guess what's going to happen next. Things were going well for Kentucky, so of course they had to lose to Vanderbilt in the first round of the SEC tournament, which, by the way, in the last 5 SEC tournaments, Kentucky has a combined record of 1-4. That is a tournament that is nicknamed the Kentucky Invitational, and we are 1-4 in the last 5. Again, completely unacceptable. The Kentucky Invitational. The rankings go, Kentucky has 31 SEC tournament wins. Alabama, I think, has 7. Calipari has 6. And then the rest of the SEC is below even John Calipari in his time at Kentucky. Anyway, Selection Sunday's here, and we all kind of know where Kentucky's going to be seated. Everyone kind of assumes we're anywhere between a 5 to an 8, and we end up with the 6th seed in the East, which had a lot of big-name teams in it. But considering how we finished the year, it was about as good of a draw as we could have hoped for, honestly. The 1 seed was Purdue, 2 was Marquette, 3 Kansas State, the 4 seed is Tennessee, 5 is Duke, and the 7 seed was Michigan State. Again, a lot of big-name teams, but being on the bottom half of that bracket, there was no one we felt like we couldn't beat. So the tournament starts and boom, the 1 seed Purdue becomes the second team in history to lose to a 16 seed in Fairleigh Dickinson. And so now our 1 seed is out. Everyone hypes up Kentucky's first game against Providence because Bryce Hopkins is on Providence and he transferred from UK. People were calling it the Bryce Hopkins revenge game. But Kentucky honestly dominated basically the entire game. Toppin held Bryce Hopkins to 7 points and then scored 18 of his own. Antonio Reeves hit 5 threes on his way to 22 points. Oscar didn't play great offensively, but he got 25 boards. That was the most by a player in the tournament in 50 years. And so Cal gets his first tournament win in 4 years. Fans are bought back in. The brackets started to open up for the Cats, and we're ready to get some revenge on Kansas State from 2018. Now, to me, the way I look at this game, Kentucky dominated that Kansas State game for 30 minutes. They built a good lead in the first half, and even though they couldn't buy a three-pointer, I think they went something like 1-11 in the first half from deep. They were still able to score. Kaysen finally started playing the way we thought he would all season. Oscar was playing well. Even Chris Livingston was having a good game. Toppin and Reeves were cold, but they were getting good looks. If you're like me, I felt that it would come together in the second half and we'd be fine. Toppin and Reeves, like I said, were cold. But it happens from time to time. Usually when guys that good are cold in a half, they come out, they see one go in, and it just kind of waterfalls from there. But overall, in the first half, Kentucky did a really good job of getting the ball out of Noel's hands and making him give it up. K-State went like 0 for 12 from 3 in the first half. But once again, Kentucky closed out the half terribly. And instead of being like up 8, they ended up like down 3 at half. To start the second half, though, they come out halftime on a 13-2 run, take a big lead, and now we're all thinking, like, just finish this out. We have all the momentum. Kansas State then makes a run of their own, and honestly, just Noel takes over the game. He finishes with 27 points, but honestly, Kansas State just started making plays, and they kept the game close. With 4 minutes left, Kentucky was up 1, had a chance to close it out. It seemed like they were in control, but it was one of those things like we're controlling this game, but it's starting to slip out of our hands. And sometimes you just watch games and there's a team that's clearly not as good as their opponent, and they just start throwing up the most ridiculous shots, and they just kind of magically go in. Yeah, well, that's pretty much what happened in the final 4 minutes of this one. Noel hit 2 just insanely deep threes over Kaysen, who honestly played good defense on him. And then they had a dude hit a step back 3 really, really late in the shot clock, damn near from the coach's box on the sideline. And then the final dagger was just Keontae Johnson hitting a ridiculous 3 over Toppin. He hadn't done anything all game and, of course, hits the dagger. Keep in mind that this was a team that, again, was 0-12 in the first half from 3 and then hits 4 of the biggest, most ridiculous shots of the game under 4 minutes. And that's how Kentucky seasons end. And just to make matters worse, the bracket, as I'm sure you know right now, is completely open. Tennessee upset Duke in the top half, and now they only have to beat Florida Atlantic to make an Elite 8. Kansas State will be playing Michigan State, who upset the 2-seed Marquette. So if we had just beat Kansas State, which we should have, that means our Final Four path would have been Michigan State, a team who barely beat us at the start of the season, and we're now a higher seed than, and Tennessee, who we already beat twice. Overall, I think it was a disappointing season. There were some really high highs, but there were some really, really low lows. The Auburn and Arkansas game were really, really good, and the Georgia and South Carolina game were really, really bad. And it's sad to say, but honestly, besides Oscar, this is probably a team that gets overlooked in the history books. Let me know down in the comments how you're going to remember this year and this team, and your thoughts on everything, I guess. Just please spare me of arguing about Cal. If you think he should be fired, that's fine. It's not going to happen. And whether you like it or I like it, he's going to be the coach here next year. So let's just accept that and have some productive conversations about this year's team. That is going to wrap up this video, guys. Again, let me know your feelings about the season down in the comments. How confident do you feel in next season's team? I myself feel pretty good, but in the next video, I'll give my thoughts on who stays and who goes for Kentucky, what the roster is going to look like. Also, drop some opinions for video topics as well. It's the off season, so there won't be a ton to talk about, and let me know what you guys want to see. I'll see you guys in next week's video. Go Cats!